So, this is the third and final part to the Divine Feminine archetypes in the Matrix series. And we're going to pick up at the moment Neo makes a choice that he's never made before when he decides to stop running. Up until this point in the film, every encounter with an agent has followed the same rule: escape, avoid confrontation, and survive. Even Morpheus informs Neo that agents aren't enemies he can expect to defeat, they are manifestations of the system. Faster than humans, stronger than humans, and nearly invincible within the Matrix. The lesson is that he can't resist them, but defeating them is something else entirely, and that's where the subway sequence comes into play. Because when Neo decides to stop running, he consciously chooses confrontation instead of escape. The scene begins immediately after Morpheus has been rescued. Trinity, Neo, and Morpheus are attempting to reach an exit point. The mission has succeeded. The logical action is to retreat, but then Agent Smith appears at the last moment before Trinity escapes. And the setting is important. The subway station functions as a threshold space, which is a place that exists between one state and another, which is the characteristic of where transformations typically occur in liminal spaces like crossroads, gateways, underground entrances, rivers, doorways, or in this case, a train station with an empty platform. Here's where Neo stands between his old identity and his future identity, between fear and mastery, which immediately brings us back to Persephone, because Persephone is fundamentally a threshold archetype. She belongs neither completely to the upper world nor completely to the underworld. Her power comes from existing between states. And in this scene, Neo occupies that same liminal condition. He's no longer the office worker from the beginning of the film, but he's also not the one yet. He exists between realities, between versions of himself. And Trinity recognizes this before he does. Throughout the film, Trinity repeatedly functions as someone who recognizes transformation while it is happening. And that role aligns strongly with Persephone's mature form as the queen of the underworld who understands the necessity of descent, because there are thresholds that can't be bypassed, only crossed. The fight is equally important because until now, Neo's been learning, watching, questioning, and reacting. But in the subway station, he begins testing himself directly against the system's higher authority. And every exchange reveals something new. He's faster than before, more confident, less dependent on fear. And the fight is not about winning yet. It's about revelation. Each blow exposes the limits of his old identity and strips away another layer of uncertainty, which is where the Inanna archetype becomes relevant. In Inanna's descent, the goddess passes through seven gates and is stripped of the symbols that define her previous status. By the end of the descent, nothing is left except the essential identity. Something similar is happening to Neo here. The Matrix the Matrix is stripping away every illusion of himself that remains, and the old self is being dismantled through direct encounter with reality. And Trinity serves as witness to that dismantling. She's unable to interfere or rescue. All she can do is watch and allow the process to unfold. Athena also becomes increasingly visible here because the fight isn't won through raw force. It's won through Neo's perception and strategy, his adaptation and awareness. Athena represents wisdom expressed through action, and Neo is beginning to embody that principle for the first time. The transformation is subtle, and then Neo lands a blow that Agent Smith doesn't expect, because he's reading the fight and Agent Smith differently than he does in the beginning. For the first time, the impossible becomes conceivable. The system experiences uncertainty, and that uncertainty is everything. Because the Matrix maintains power by convincing people that transcendence is impossible. The subway fight ends without Neo achieving complete victory, but victory isn't the point. The point is that he crosses the threshold and he stays and confronts the guardian of the old reality, and he comes out of it changed. The descent is over and the transformation has begun. So immediately after the subway confrontation is where Neo has crossed an important threshold, but he hasn't yet completed his transformation. After fighting Agent Smith, Neo runs, not because he's failed, but because he hasn't yet become what he's destined to. And what follows is one of the most important chase sequences where agents pursue Neo throughout the city. On the surface, this is a cool action scene, but what's beneath that, what it really is the final pursuit of the old self. Because throughout initiation myths, there is a stage where the initiate has crossed the threshold, but is still being pursued by the forces of the former world. The old identity doesn't just disappear quietly. It fights for survival, or the powers that be fight to keep it intact. And this is exactly what the agents represent here. They aren't just villains, they're the enforcement mechanism of the illusion. Everywhere Neo runs, the system follows. The old reality refuses to release him. Before Neo can become anything new, the old Neo must fall completely. So after reaching the phone, Neo is intercepted by Agent Smith. The chase ends, the escape route closes, and for the first time in the film, there is no remaining strategy, no training program, just this confrontation. Agent Smith shoots Neo multiple times, and Neo collapses, and then something remarkable happens. On the Nebuchadnezzar, the monitors flatline, the crew, Morpheus and Trinity all watch as Neo dies. The prophecy appears broken and the mission seems lost. Everything the narrative has been building toward appears to collapse in a matter of seconds. In the oldest surviving versions of Anana's descent, the story doesn't end well when she reaches the underworld. It reaches its climax when she's judged, struck down, and suspended, dead, not metaphorically transformed or spiritually enlightened, but literally deceased. Her body is hung up in the underworld as a visible sign that the descent has reached its absolute conclusion. Nothing remains, and that's exactly where Neo arrives in this moment. The film strips him of the one thing heroes are usually allowed to keep, which is agency. He can't fight. For perhaps the first time in the story, he's completely powerless. Many transformation myths insist that genuine rebirth can occur while the old identity still believes it's in control. The ego wants improvement and victory where initiation demands surrender. So transformation begins with collapse. And this is why Neo's death feels different from the conventional action film death. This scene isn't asking whether the hero can survive, it's asking whether the hero can release the identity that has carried him this far. And looking back to Persephone, her story ends with sovereignty. She becomes someone capable of remaining present in places others fear. She develops authority within the realm of death because her reaction to Neo's death compared to everyone else on the ship is quite different. Others respond to what they see, but Trinity responds to what she knows. The distinction is subtle but important. Everyone else is looking at a body. Trinity is looking at a story she knows is unfinished. She has conviction at Neo's transformation. And that conviction also connects her strongly to Isis, probably more than at any earlier point in the film. When divine order is broken, Isis doesn't accept the broken state as final reality. She seeks restoration, wholeness, and reintegration for Osiris. Again and again, her mythology centers on the refusal to allow death to have the final word. That energy begins appearing in Trinity before Neo returns, before any miracle occurs. The important thing is that her faith arrives first. The resurrection follows afterward. Transformation begins when someone, in this case Trinity, can perceive possibility in the midst of apparent defeat. In this scene, Trinity becomes the sole character holding that possibility through unwavering recognition of what's trying to emerge, which makes this death scene far more than the ending of Neo's old identity. It's also the culmination of Trinity's archetypal evolution. She's been guide, initiator, witness, and companion. Now, for the first time, the keeper of life in the presence of death. And that role will define everything that happens next. If Neo's death is the climax of the initiation, then the next scene is the climax of Trinity's journey, because everything she's represented throughout the film converges into a single moment. It's this moment aboard the Nebuchadnezzar. Neo is dead. The monitors show no sign of life. The crew has no reason to believe he's coming back, and yet Trinity moves toward him. The film introduces an entirely different force, which is his connection with Trinity. And this is where the Isis archetype reaches its fullest expression. One of the most striking aspects of Isis mythology is that resurrection isn't portrayed as a mechanical process. It's relational. The restoration of life occurs because connection survives the fragmentation and love survives separation. That pattern is shown almost exactly in this scene. Trinity doesn't resurrect Neo through superior power. She doesn't perform a ritual or cast a spell. She doesn't even defeat Agent Smith herself. Instead, she speaks to what the Oracle told her, that she would fall in love with the One. And because she loves Neo, he can't be dead. This could be interpreted purely as romance, but really something deeper is happening. The film is placing love in direct opposition to the logic of the Matrix. The Matrix is built on calculation, prediction, and control. Everything within the system can be measured and reduced to data, but love can't. And that makes it dangerous because it introduces something the system can't fully account for, a force that operates according to meaning rather than programming. Her words function almost like an invocation directed toward the deepest part of Neo's identity, not Thomas Anderson, the frightened seeker from the beginning of the film, but something deeper and still unrealized. This is why the scene works, even outside any specific mythological framework, because nearly every culture contains stories where love, devotion, memory, or recognition becomes bridges to impossible separation. The kiss is simply the physical expression of recognition. It's the visible manifestation of a truth Trinity already holds. The resurrection begins before the kiss. It begins the moment she refuses to accept death as the final interpretation of reality. And when Neo opens his eyes, something crucial happens. Not only in him, in the structure of the story, because up to this point, Trinity's role has largely involved facilitating transformation in others. Now she becomes the catalyst, the direct cause of transformation and the force that activates the final stage of Neo's becoming. Without Trinity, there is no resurrection. There's no fully realized one. And without that realization, the myth remains incomplete. The hero's transformation reaches fulfillment precisely because the divine feminine principle has remained present throughout every stage of the journey, from awakening to descent to death and finally to rebirth. When most people think about the Matrix, they think about Neo for obvious reasons. He's the chosen one, he's the hero, the savior. But when we examine the story through the lens of mythology and archetype, a different pattern emerges because at every major turning point in Neo's journey, Trinity is already there. Before Neo learns to navigate between worlds, Trinity moves through them effortlessly. And before Neo becomes the one, Trinity recognizes who he is becoming. Throughout the film, Trinity repeatedly embodies qualities associated with some of humanity's oldest divine feminine archetypes. Like Sophia, she guides awakening through hidden knowledge and intuitive recognition. Like Isis, she preserves wholeness through fragmentation and becomes a catalyst for resurrection. Like Persephone, she moves comfortably between realities that others experience as separate worlds. And like Inanna, she remains connected to transformation, descent, and the profound changes that occur when illusions fall away. What's fascinating is that the Matrix never explicitly tells us to view Trinity this way. The symbolism operates beneath the surface through structure, repetition, and through archetypal patterns that have appeared in myths, mystery traditions, and spiritual stories for thousands of years. And perhaps that's one reason the film continues to resonate decades after its release, because beneath the science fiction, the action sequences, and the philosophical questions about reality, there is a much older story unfolding. A story about awakening, transformation, and the forces that make transformation possible. In many modern narratives or modern hero narratives, the feminine exists on the periphery of the journey. In The Matrix, however, Trinity occupies a much more significant role. She's not just a reward waiting at the end of the quest, she's an active participant in the process of awakening. The divine feminine principle expressed through modern myth. And if that's true, then perhaps one of the most important questions raised by the Matrix isn't just whether Neo is the one, but whether he could have ever become the one without Trinity. Because from the beginning of the story to its final act, she's there at every threshold of transformation and as the force that helps the hero's transformation possible. Thank you so much for watching, and if you'd like to be notified when I upload more content, remember to like and subscribe.